In the next 5 minutes, I want to tell you about a problem, then I'll tell you how we got ourselves into this mess, why you should care about getting us out of it, which will bring us to how Ignite Phoenix saves the world. The problem that I want to talk about is a decline in social capital in America. What is social capital? Social capital is like the glue that holds our society together. And it's actually much easier to describe social capital through examples than through the definition that you're seeing on the screen. So the first example that I'll give is that in the last quarter of the 20th century, we saw declined participation in all types of political and community activities. For example, I'm less likely to be making this speech tonight than I would have been in 1975. And why this is a real problem is that over the first half of the 20th century, we saw this amazing rise in organizations like the PTA, the Boy Scouts, the Kiwanis, and then coincidentally, I didn't know, but this is the red line that Brian talked about earlier tonight. We have this huge decline in community involvement and extends beyond political and community organizations. Every area where Americans get together, including religious life, we can see from 1970 into this century, there's a slight decline in church attendance. It extends to charitable giving. People don't give today like they did in the 1960s. And when you give today, it requires going online, joining a mailing list, and making an online donation, not getting out in your community and making a physical face-to-face connection in your community. It extends to informal social activities. Families don't eat dinner together anymore. All of this information is from a book called Bowling Alone, and it's called Bowling Alone because bowling leagues are becoming extinct. Nobody goes out and meets people in bowling leagues. They bowl with people they already know. So now that I've given you a very brief summary of this problem, let's look at what are major things that changed over the last half of the 20th century which might explain this decline in community involvement. The first one is generational change. And that means that if you look at this age group, it's not that my grandparents stopped participating in the community. It's that my generation never participated in the community to the level that my grandparents' generation did when they were my age. Another big one, and I love the title of this one straight from the book, America watches TV all day, every day. If you see from the top bar, some people just leave it on as background all day long. We're not out in the community because we're in front of our television sets. Some people might say, well, my excuse is that I'm too busy with work. And most of you can't give that excuse, but one segment of the population that can is women, not because they want to, but in many cases because they had to, entered the workplace in much greater numbers over the last quarter of the 20th century. So now's the part where I imagine that every one of you is wearing this t-shirt, and I have to answer the question, why should you care about this problem? And my first answer is, if you're not going to do it for me, then do it for the kids. In this slide, we have a kids count index, things like infant mortality rates, teens that drop out of high school, all kinds of bad things. The worst thing that could happen to your child, besides being born poor, is being born in a neighborhood with no social capital. If you love democracy, you love social capital. I'm an accountant, so I had to throw in, if you have high social capital in your state, you have low tax evasion. All kinds of other things like greater equality that I didn't have time to fit in the presentation are in the book. If you don't care about anyone but yourself, do this for yourself. Along the bottom, this is the number of times a year that you volunteer, go to club meetings, go to church. Just a few times a year, those first few are really going to boost your personal happiness. So that brings us to, how does Ignite Phoenix save the world? And when I say Ignite Phoenix, I mean all of you in the audience. You're the leaders that are here tonight meeting people in your community instead of sitting in front of your televisions. And what does the book tell us about how we can get out of this problem? Well, it says we can solve this because we've solved it before. If you think back to the Industrial Revolution, people were moving into big cities. They were reminiscing about their small town way of life when people actually care about each other. So what did they do to fix this problem? They created new organizations to bring the change they wanted to see into the world. You can see that at the beginning of the 1900s, there was a huge spike in the number of organizations that were founded. Those organizations are still around today. They've been alive for the last 100 years. But now the world is changing again, and it's our turn to establish the organizations that are going to exist for the next 100 years. And Ignite Phoenix is the first step to that. But is this going to be our legacy for the next 100 years, or do we need to create something bigger? And the last thought that I'll leave you with is that there's two types of social capital. Bonding capital is talking to people that you already know. Bridging capital is meeting people in your community that aren't the same as you. They don't do what you do. And that's how we get ahead. Thank you very much.